Hello there, good evening everyone, and welcome back to part 9 and the final part of the recollections of Tcheslaw Tchekhovitch Gurdjieff, a master in life. And this evening, for the concluding section, we're going to meet 4 women. So part 4 is entitled 4 Women, and we're going to learn about Sophia, the youngest sister, who we've been introduced to already, I believe. Julia Osipovna, who I believe was Mr. Gurdjieff's wife. Babushka, perhaps his mother or nan. And Jean de Salzman, a lawful transmission, the person, the individual who Mr. Gurdjieff entrusted the Institute to upon his death. And so we will meet and encounter these 4 women. And as we are finishing up this text and we have to read something else afterwards, there is a poll on the post tab or community tab. I don't know. I think it's posts, I believe. Anyway, you'll find it's the last one if you look through. And this is what it looks like, and this is where we find ourselves. There's currently 24 votes being cast, and leading by a large margin, is J.G. Bennett Talks on Beelzebub's Tales. So we already read it once before on the old channel on Book Club, but it's here, and it's actually a wonderful survey of Beelzebub's Tales, and perhaps once we've read Bennett's commentaries and orages also again, then we'll be ready to dive back into that text once again, because if you were with us earlier today, I highly recommend going to listen to an essay, The Canon of the Gurdjieff Work, and David Simon talks about all the books, and in there when he's talking about Beelzebub's Tales, he says one should read it and listen to it regularly so that it becomes as familiar as a child's fairy tale, I think, is how it's put. And so it's looking very likely that on Sunday night, J.G. Bennett's Talks on Beelzebub's Tales will win unless something drastic happens. But if you haven't cast your vote yet, I believe we may as well begin doing polls as we did before. That way everyone can get involved and have a democratic say into what we read next. So, yeah, we're going to finish this. Then we'll likely move on to Bennett's commentaries on Beelzebub's Tales. Of course, we will continue with the commentaries. So lots coming up at the channel. If that's interesting for you, as I often ask, if you don't mind, like and subscribe. Share the show if you've got a social media, or you can just send it to everyone you know. That would be good also. And hello, there's Stephen Lahn. Good evening, my friend. Jordan's here. Says hello, looking forward to 4 women. And our very own lady, Sophia. Hello and welcome. And I hope everyone gets something out of this final section. So part 4, 4 women, Sophia, the youngest sister. Sophia Ivanovna was the 5th and last child of the family, and from a very early age she felt a special affection for her eldest brother, Georgy Ivanovitch, whom she also greatly admired. He constantly astonished her, for example, with his mastery in crafts and other manual work. Observing experts in these fields and putting into practice what he had learned, he eventually surpassed them all in skill and dexterity. Because he was helpful and attentive and would generously lend a hand to anyone, he was well liked by craftsmen who gladly shared the knowledge and secrets of their crafts with him. As Georgy Ivanovitch was interested in all aspects of human life, he learned almost every trade in this way. While still young, he already knew how to knit, embroider, and make fireworks, Chinese toys, rifles, and artificial flowers. In short, everything the Russians called fancy goods, not to mention other objects sold in the bazaar. Everything about him fascinated Sophia, and she told me that she used to follow him around like a shadow. As a child, she had been nicknamed black thread by her father because of her slender figure and dark complexion. As carefree and sprightly as a baby goat, she was often the one to be sent on errands. She later told me with much tenderness of many unforgettable moments shared in childhood with her elder brother. One day their parents went away for some time, taking the other 3 children with them. Sophia stayed behind with Georgy Ivanovitch, who spent his time fixing things or doing odd jobs, as was usual during his youth. Their uncle's family, who lived nearby, had been asked to keep an eye on them and to prepare their meals. Georgy Ivanovitch always waited until the last minute to send his sister to get their dinner. Ever-willing black thread would dash right off. However, the road was filled with many things that might distract a little girl. Afraid that she wouldn't carry out her errand, Georgy Ivanovitch invented various tricks so she would avoid these temptations. For example, he would tell her, "Take these plates, but you have to run. I'm going to spit on this stone. If it dries before you return, I might die." Afraid of the stone drying, Sophia ran until she was out of breath. When she got back, her heart beating wildly, her first look was at the stone. Was it wet? As always, it was. This trick was so effective that Georgy Ivanovitch used it often. Of course, he went back and spat on the stone from time to time when his sister was out of sight, until the day she caught him at it. Long afterwards, the memory of this event made them laugh, and this made her grow even fonder of her elder brother. On another occasion, Georgy Ivanovitch fell ill and wanted some ice to put on his stomach. It was black thread, as usual, who went to get it from a cafe some distance away. The owner was grateful to Georgy Ivanovitch for having repaired some machines of his and generously gave her all the ice she wanted. Sophia insisted that he load as much as possible on her back, winning the cafe owner's admiration with her courage and energy. While running back home, half the ice melted in the sun, and she arrived completely soaked. But when Georgy Ivanovitch said how much the ice comforted him, it was Sophia's turn to melt. And if you are interested, it's not the best picture. That's Gurdjieff's youngest sister, Sofia Ivanovna. Another story demonstrated the harmony and solidarity that reigned in this family. It took place when their father had practically been ruined by an epidemic that had ravaged his herds, and he was offered money one day to cut some logs. While the offer was an unexpected boon, he deeply regretted that he could not accept it because 2 were needed to do the work. But Sophia, little black thread, hardly 9 years old, saved the situation by showing that she was quite capable of doing the sawing with her father, and she begged him to accept the job. For several weeks she was able to overcome her fatigue, and between them the work was successfully accomplished. Since Georgy Ivanovitch was the eldest son, he was exempt from military service. When he reached the age of 20, he decided to take advantage of this situation by helping his father solve the family's financial problems. As he couldn't make enough money working for someone else, he realized that the best solution would be to open a shop. But how to find enough money to begin? After much thought, he decided to make the merchandise himself, young as he was, and he soon began to display his wares in a well-placed stall. There one can find everything to satisfy the bourgeois clientele of the surrounding area: artificial flowers, multicolored lampshades, fans of all sorts, piggy banks, and decorative plaster objects that he molded and painted himself. Only one person was there to help him in this venture, and that was Sophia. Her brother's efforts to help the family made him more dear to her every day, especially as their work had brought a smile back to their mother's face. Before long the business was thriving, but such rapid success could only arouse jealousy among the neighbouring merchants. They constantly jeered at him in front of his always crowded stall, but Georgy Ivanovitch knew how to respond when they said things like, "Hey there, you half-black Greek. What are you trafficking in to lure all those customers?" And Georgy Ivanovitch would respond, "It's much too precious for your kind. You could never understand. Go back to your shack." "Oh, is that so?" they would throw back. "That junk of yours is only good for duping half-wits." Black Thread was delighted to see the others so full of admiration and envy for her brother. When the family was back on its feet, George Ivanovitch closed his stall to devote himself entirely to his search, but he still continued from time to time to help his parents in various ways. Because of these strong ties woven from childhood between the eldest brother and the younger sister, it was natural that Black Thread supported her brother with care and affection all her life. After the death of Julia Osipovna, Mr. Gurdjieff's wife, Sophia, never stopped showing proof of her devotion to him, first at the Priory and then in Paris, where she remained close to him until the end. That Georgy Ivanovitch was able to give himself entirely to his work in his last years was partly the result of his being able to rely on his sister to take care of his everyday needs. As are so many others, I am grateful. I am full of gratitude when I think of Sofia Ivanovna, for in sparing Georgy Ivanovitch from having to do so many things, she freed him from the well-being of us all, and for the good of his work. And so it's like maybe she wasn't interested in the ideas, maybe she was, but by helping Gurdjieff, by easing the burden, she was helping the work, the second and third line of work she was interested in. Julia Osipovna. Mr. Gurdjieff's wife could not be distinguished from his other pupils either by his behaviour toward her or by her attitude toward him. As the rest of us did, she called him Georgy Ivanovitch, as was the custom in Russia. New residents at the Priory were quite surprised to discover during their stay that this lady, so full of grace and kindness, was Mr. Gurdjieff's wife. It might seem surprising that this member of the Polish high aristocracy, who associated with those close to the Tsar, became the wife of a man so remote from the manners of the court. Mr. Gurdjieff had won the heart of this young woman, though she little suspected what she was to find out about him later. One day she confided to us, with a certain smile, how moved she was to discover her husband's true nature, and to realize that he was totally devoted to work of a spiritual order and dedicated to the good of his fellow man. In his quiet strength she had until then appreciated him above all as an affectionate companion, a benevolent protector, and the hoped-for father of their children. This had seemed enough to make her happy. She saw him in a new light when she realized that her husband was revered by those around him as an exceptional teacher and as an authentic master of wisdom, with the power to help his pupils discover their true spiritual potential. She then took a discreet place beside him, careful not to hinder in any way the work he had to accomplish. When describing someone, it is natural to emphasize their characteristic qualities, originality and special traits, in a word, all that distinguishes them from others. But with Julia Osipovna, this would seem inappropriate and even offensive to her memory, since the aim of all her efforts was to remain unnoticed and to submit herself to the service of a work that was greater than her. She behaved as both a mother and a friend to us, always ready to help, to advise, even to care for those in need, as once was the case with me. Although conflicts are inevitable in all communities and people hurt each other unnecessarily, Julia Osipovna never had the smallest dispute with anyone. She was always ready to listen and to understand the justifications of those who persisted in their stubbornness, and she did this without harbouring any grudge or showing the slightest criticism. Her impartial goodwill created an atmosphere of peace among us all. When this slender woman performed the movements, my attention was held by her noble beauty. I was particularly struck when she opened her arms. This movement made me think of an eagle opening its wings before taking flight. She became so light that it seemed a simple gesture would be enough for her to leave the earth. If I had to define what characterized her, I would say that she was the embodiment of delicacy and tact, as was shown by an apparently commonplace event, which I cannot forget. And here is Mr. Gurdjieff's wife, Julia Osipovna. And so now we have a commonplace event which Tchekhovitch cannot forget. It was at the Priory. A newcomer with diplomas and special qualifications from abroad had been put in charge of the cows. One day he insolently replied to something Julia Osipovna had said about looking after these animals. I approached quietly, thinking that the presence of another might soften his arrogance. But instead of making him calmer, an audience only incited him to show off his knowledge further, and he held forth pompously on the superiority of modern scientific techniques over traditional methods which, according to him, were based on an outmoded elementary empiricism. This difference of opinion was about how to feed a young calf that had just made its appearance in the world. Our young expert, following the latest methodology, was busy milking the poor mother when Julia Osipovna interrupted him to ask why he was doing that. He replied that it was important to discard the first milk, saying that it was fundamentally harmful to the young calf. He was not the first among those responsible for the cows to employ this modern method in order to correct the imperfection of Mother Nature. The last such attempt had actually resulted in the death of a young calf. To prevent any further untimely interventions in the workings of nature, Mr. Gurdjieff had entrusted Julia Osipovna with the task of overseeing the newborn calves. Unaware of the misadventures of his predecessor and indignant at having his expertise put in doubt, this new person in charge showed little respect towards Julia Osipovna. Nevertheless, after she had explained the methods that had already been tried and their results, she calmly told him that he was no doubt right, but that on this occasion George Ivanovitch wanted to respect the process of nature and would be annoyed to learn that the new director of the cowshed had not been informed about his instructions, as the results of all these experiments greatly interested him. These words had the effect of putting an immediate end to this moderate procedure. In spite of the young scientist's reluctance, the newborn was returned to its mother and did not suffer the sad fate of the previous calf. After this, I told Julia Osipovna how indignant I was at this young man's rudeness and suggested that Mr. Gurdjieff should be informed. She replied gently, "Georgy Ivanovitch already has many burdens and worries. Why add to them? Besides, the young man's behaviour does not come from bad intentions, but from lack of experience." After a short silence, she added, "He is sincere, but his head is stuffed with bookish knowledge, and practical applications escape him. He tries his best, and this is honourable. When he is in a good mood, I'll try to speak with him." Being always gentle and considerate, she quickly won this man's respect and friendship, and this incident eventually brought her a new admirer. For my part, in front of her magnanimity, I was ashamed to have let myself be carried away by my narrow sense of justice, which would only have corrected and punished a fault without actually addressing the cause. Seeing her always so radiant, we were all convinced she was in excellent health, but it turned out that she had been ravaged by cancer for a long time. The doctors had been wrong in their diagnosis, and she had therefore been treated for all kinds of other illnesses, while the real evil continued its destructive course. When Mr. Gurdjieff, still very weak himself from his accident, ordered the tests for his wife, the result showed that the disease was already incurable. Julia Osipovna was growing thinner by the day, and her appearance among us became more and more rare. Nevertheless, she remained truly herself in spite of all her suffering, and when she passed away, she left behind a subtle fragrance of purity and nobility. We all followed the coffin to the cemetery at Evon, where Mr. Gurdjieff had obtained a plot for the members of his family. Babushka. By all accounts, Georgy Ivanovitch seems to have passed his childhood in the heart of a patriarchal family, or matriarchal as we shall soon see, reminiscent of biblical times. In meetings with remarkable men, he even devotes a very moving chapter to the memory of his father. Since for some time I had the privilege of living close to Mr. Gurdjieff's mother, I am sure the reader will understand why I would wish to devote to this woman some recollections that illustrate her exceptional character. After a long series of adventures, sufferings, and privations, this courageous lady managed to reach the priory with other members of her family. They had succeeded in escaping the Turkish invasion, though Georgy Ivanovitch's father and several relatives, not wanting to leave their homeland, were inevitably to become victims of the genocide perpetrated by the invader. Travelling through Soviet Russia and remote regions of Transcaucasia with neither money nor shelter, the refugees lived through an extraordinary ordeal. Mr. Gurdjieff's mother was accompanied by his youngest sister, Sophia, and her husband, Mr. Gurdjieff's brother, Dmitri, with his wife and 4 children, were also among these refugees. When Georgy Ivanovitch learned where they had taken refuge, he immediately sent help, but long months were to pass before they finally arrived at the priory in the winter of 1923 amid feelings of joy tinged with sadness. From the first day, we all called her babushka, grandmother, just as her grandchildren did. She was of medium height and always wrapped herself in a black shawl. For me, she was the image of the eternal woman, ageless, a sort of archetype. And there's Babushka, Mr. Gurdjieff's mother. Here I must return to the past. When Georgy Ivanovitch's father and mother were married, they wanted to have a child right away. Twice the young woman conceived and gave birth, but each time the newborn survived only a few weeks. Feeling desperate at first and later becoming really depressed, she came to see her fate as a just punishment, proof of her unworthiness to be a mother. She withdrew little by little from all the convivial social events that traditionally marked the life of her family. She no longer took care of her youthful appearance, chose the simplest clothing and the most basic food, and adopted a self-effacing, modest manner. Although far from being a fanatic, she gave herself up to continual prayer, imploring heaven to bless her with a child. One of the religious practices still widely honoured in that region was to dedicate oneself to begging and to offer what one received to charity. Generally, it was women of the poorer social classes who, unable to pay for a doctor, resorted to this ritual to obtain divine favour. But this young woman was quite well off. She and her husband lived with her mother, a celebrated midwife who was well known for hundreds of miles around. To merit divine pardon and rid herself of all traces of pride and possessiveness, she made a humble vow that, if she were granted this blessing, she would offer to the church the weight of the child in wax. With this wax she would make candles and give them to the poor and to all those lacking the means, to ritually honour their favourite saints by lighting candles during religious ceremonies. That in itself was not a very great sacrifice, for although wax was expensive, what really mattered was that the money came from alms acquired by begging. It was this act of mortification that constituted the real sacrifice. If a child were to be born, then, as soon as her health permitted, the young woman would go begging in great privation, barefoot, without either shawl or headdress, her hair hanging loose. It came to pass that divine grace soon favoured her. Once she had conceived, she guarded herself against any impious act or thought. All the time fearing she would lose her child, she prayed continually. Once the child had made its appearance in the world, she faithfully honoured her vow and even continued with it in the following years. This conduct seemed to assure her the favours of heaven, because after Georgy Ivanovitch she had 4 more children, a son, Dmitri, and 3 daughters, Maria, Luceria, and Sophia, all of whom survived their mother. The family home was in Alexandropol, an important economic and administrative centre of the region. Our babushka lived with her parents until the death of her mother, who left a very deep impression of her. In order to understand the roots and influences that determined Georgy Ivanovitch's destiny, we must devote some words to his grandmother. Her renown, both as a midwife and as a woman of remarkable qualities, was so great that not only pregnant women, but people with all kinds of illnesses came even from the most remote parts of Transcaucasia for her advice. All that time, as people travelled by horse-drawn vehicles, it became necessary for her to buy the large field in front of the house to accommodate all those who came. Mr. Gurdjieff remembered this very well. In the field there was always an enormous encampment filled with entire families of various cultural origins waiting their turn to see Sophia Paji, Sister Sophia in Turkish, which was how she was known to everyone. She had earned this title of Paji by virtue of her devotion to others and her never refusing the least service to anyone. Though famous, she even took on a particular obligation to devote the greatest part of her time to the poor, sick, and suffering. She never put off a visit till another time, but each day fulfilled what fate had decided was her duty. And I believe Mr. Gurdjieff's grandmother plays a large part in his formative years, right? In the beginning of Beelzebub's tales, Gurdjieff writes that I believe his grandmother on her deathbed says to him, don't do things as others do. Don't. If you're going to do it, don't do it like other people do it, I believe, if I remember rightly. And so here we're hearing about her second hand from Tchekhovitch. From the rich she asked, to the poor she gave. Such was her view of justice. It was the poor who had baptized her Paji, sister of kindness and charity. The more fortunate willingly brought her their old clothing and what they no longer had any use for, which she redistributed to those in need. This further increased her popularity and authority. Georgy Ivanovitch's sister told me, all we had to say was that we were the grandchildren of Sophia Paji for people to give us their seats in public places, in the hammam, or even in theatres. Everywhere Sophia Paji was revered. Despite there being many qualified and respected doctors in Alexandropol, Sophia Paji's prestige was unequalled. Many stories, such as the following one, contributed to her renown. One night the wife of a high official began feeling contractions, and the doctor was urgently summoned. Around noon the delivery of the child was imminent, but the labour was difficult and various interventions were of no avail. The exhausted wife could not continue her efforts, and the baby, as if disappointed, withdrew. In the evening, as the situation became critical, the servants and neighbours demanded the intervention of Sophia Paji, but the family would not lower themselves to ask for her assistance. As for the doctor, he was categorically opposed to this suggestion. However, when the doctor finally admitted that he was powerless, they did decide to call Sophia Paji, who came immediately. The doctor, wrapped in his dignity, retired to a corner, not admitting that one should have recourse to an illiterate woman. Addressing the husband with a disdainful reproach, he said, "Look, your wife is in agony. She is already quite ashen, and you're going to let that sorceress make her suffer more?" Sophia Paji did not lose a moment and did what had to be done. To the astonishment of everyone, she quickly brought the baby into the world, provided the necessary care, and put the child in the cradle. Then, approaching the mother's bed, she picked up the placenta and flung it at the feet of the doctor with these scathing words, "Here, eat this, and go on with your deadly ministrations." The new mother recovered her colour, and as soon as she was out of danger, Sophia Paji left. According to witnesses, the doctor emerged with genuine dignity. Confronted by Sophia Paji's evident knowledge, he recognized her true value and, in spite of her offensive gesture, asked her not to be angry, assuring her of his sincere admiration. "Well done, Sophia Paji, well done," he repeated. The professional exploit further increased her renown, as from then on her abilities were recognized by the medical authorities. She gave the considerable sum she had received to the poor, stating that she exercised this profession only to help others, not to earn a living. Such were the strong roots of our babushka. When she felt her end approaching due to cancer of the liver, she devoted herself entirely to prayer, wishing to remain conscious and lucid in the face of death. After several days, sensing that her final hour was imminent, she prepared her body for death, dressed herself in a gown that would serve as her shroud, and quietly lay down to await the end. Even as her body was getting cold, she chanted the words of her favourite prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," sometimes looking at those present as if to assure herself that she was still here on earth, sometimes singing more loudly, "Thy kingdom come," as if to let the mystery resound more deeply in herself. Her last words, spoken in Armenian, had the character of a Japanese poem. "The bird is silent, it has flown away to the other land. The flower has faded, it has left this life, but the wind will scatter its seeds." And looking at those around her, she added, "And you, laugh or cry, do as you wish, it's all the same to me. I am already elsewhere." After uttering these words, she closed her eyes, never to open them again. From these women, whose characters were forged in steel, the young Georgy Ivanovitch would certainly have received unforgettable impressions and an exceptional preparation for life. And so now we move on to the last of the four women. And, before I carry on, hey, Stephen, are you going back to Giza? Or are you going to explore somewhere else? Stephen Lance says, off to Egypt in March for a hands-on. So, where are you heading and what do you plan to see, Stephen? Do tell us. And now this is about the last of the four women, a very important woman in the third line of work. The work in general is Jean de Salzman, a lawful transmission. In 1921, we had to return to Constantinople, and Mr. Gurdjieff had recently invited me to stay in his house. After about a week, I had come to know most of the older pupils, those who had been with him since his stay in Russia. One day I answered the door. A young woman stood there, accompanied by a man carrying a child in his arms. "What can I do for you, madam?" Without waiting for a reply, she strode across the threshold and, in a Russian tinged with French, asked, "Is Georgy Ivanovitch here?" As I hesitated, she entered the meeting room and was joyfully greeted. "Gena Julievna has arrived." Mr. Gurdjieff then appeared and warmly welcomed Madame de Salzman, her husband, Alexander, and their daughter, Bushka. Soon after arriving, Madame de Salzman and her husband entered into all the activities, in particular the movements. Even then, Madame de Salzman stood out among Georgy Ivanovitch's pupils by the quality of her presence. The women and girls all felt a special respect for her. She was always calm and even-tempered in her relationships with others, and she also quickly gained the respect and affection of Ouspensky's group in Constantinople. It was Gena Julievna to whom everyone turned for help in understanding the special experience of the movements. An excellent pianist and former pupil of Émile Jacques Dalcroze, she had founded a successful school of rhythmic dance in Tiflis. However, after meeting Georgy Ivanovitch, she submitted without hesitation to the demands of his teaching. Having an innate sense of choreography, she understood how the movement should be practiced. Trying always to decipher their meaning and stressing the need for precision in the sequence and rhythm, she helped everyone feel their scope and significance. Mr. Gurdjieff quickly entrusted her with the responsibility of overseeing this work. I can still see her working intensely with Lily Galumian and Olga Ivanovna, who later became the wife of the visionary American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. They practiced for hours with other experienced pupils. And of course, to complete the set, that's Jean de Salzman. If you didn't know, she took over the Institute after Mr. Gurdjieff's passing and has a very wonderful book, The Reality of Being, which was made up of her notebooks. And I believe there's a chap, Ravi Ravindra, who was her pupil, who's written a nice book about her also. So more books to add to the canon, although David Simon doesn't mention The Reality of Being in his canon. This unremitting work was punctuated by repeated requests such as, "Gianna, look, is this correct? Gianna, would you please check the position of my arms?" During this work, I never noticed any reluctance on her part, nor did I ever see an experience of weariness appear on her majestic countenance. Beautiful and gracious and amazingly open towards others, resistance melted magically before her. She was like this in Constantinople, as she was to be later at the Priory. I remember being opposite her during a dance that was said to come from Korovod. Buoyed by her complete yet natural participation in the dance, I felt myself being lifted beyond what I believed to be my limits. One evening in the study house when Mr. Gurdjieff had to leave after the day's work, the older pupils asked Thomas de Hartmann if he would improvise some music on the piano. Madame de Salzman and about 10 other women began to dance. Some distance from the stage there were comfortable benches covered with rich furs. Alexandra de Salzman, myself, and a few other pupils discreetly took our places there to watch the improvisation. I had never seen anything so enchanting and so conducive to the awakening of man to the unknown. I began to understand that communication through dance was something beyond compare, and that it could become an almost perfect language. All that these women felt, even all that they thought, in short, everything they expressed in the dance, was transmitted to us by the essential quality of their movements. Madame de Salzman was in the centre and seemed to bestow unity and harmony on this feminine choreography. We watched the scene, not daring to move for fear of disrupting it. I do not know if the dancers still remember that evening, but for me it remains one of the purest moments in the magical setting of the study house. We often sought out Gianna Julievna to speak to her about our personal inner search. She gave unstintingly of her time and knew how to guide us towards what was essential. I remember one day she told me, "We have to suffer from our unconscious instability and all the time seek to return to what we feel to be the right attitude. Inwardly we are not able to keep this attitude. In fact, without our being aware of it, our state changes all the time." What poor Gianna Julievna had to deal with at that time, I was still very naive. Now and then another inner state did appear in me of its own accord, and I imagined that I could maintain it. I still did not understand the hard truth expressed by the teaching, that in man's ordinary state everything just happens, and that in this state he does not have the capacity to act consciously. Madame de Salzman, like Ouspensky, often took notes. It was forbidden to do so during the activities, although it was permitted afterwards. She especially noted down everything to do with the movements and the music that accompanied them. Later in Paris, I also tried to write down different movements and exercises. I quickly realized how difficult it was to find a satisfactory notation that showed how all the different movements, rhythms, and sequences were combined into a whole. I then understood why Madame de Salzman noted separately the movements of the limbs, head, and trunk, each with its own rhythm, and later reassembled them with the music. One day, much later, after the death of Mr. Gurdjieff, Madame de Salzman visited me to ask if I had kept notes on certain exercises. I thought I would be able to help, but, in fact, neither my memory nor my notes, most of which I had lost, were of any help. This made me more aware of the essential role she played in transmitting the teaching, and how she constantly and tirelessly served it. Each day Mr. Gurdjieff threw us some pearls of living fragments of knowledge from his treasure trove, as one throws crumbs to birds, not being sure they would be received, pondered, preserved, and transmitted. Most of us were not able to recognize the true value of what Mr. Gurdjieff was offering us. Madame de Salzmann had an inner strength that enabled her to solve the most difficult problems. Years later, when I saw her regularly and worked under her guidance, I noticed that, apart from her own creativity and contributions, she had preserved all the exercises and practical knowledge that Georgy Ivanovitch had brought. And I don't know if that's available in published material, all the movements and the rhythms and the sacred dances. I've never seen it myself. Maybe you guys out there have. Do let me know if you happen to seen Madame de Salzmann's notes about the movements. In the first few years, I was not really aware of Madame de Salzmann's role. However, towards the end of Mr. Gurdjieff's life, it became clear to me how important she was for him. He solemnly stated more than once, "Whoever seeks a relationship with me must come through Gienna. I have entrusted the continuation of my work to her, and she has my complete confidence. She has never let me down." Today I shudder at the thought that Madame de Salzmann might not have been at Georgy Ivanovitch's side. It is thanks to her and to those around her that I have been able to appreciate the profundity of the oral teaching he left. It is also thanks to her that the teaching has remained alive and has spread gradually throughout the world. And the final part, Part 5, The Last Days, Autumn 1949. It was the end of summer 1949. Mr. Gurdjieff seldom went out. As I learned later from his doctors, he had known for a long time that his days were numbered, but he allowed none of this to show. For most of those around him, nothing in his routine had apparently changed, except perhaps a particular concern for putting his affairs in order. In other respects, on quite another level, he made very special demands on his closest French pupils, as if he wished to call them to an ever greater responsibility in leading the work of the groups. At that time, many English and Americans had joined us, and Mr. Gurdjieff clearly wished them to take part in more intensive work. His strength declined from day to day, and he only stayed at meals for a short while. We then knew that his condition was very serious. Apart from that, his appearance was deceptive because, in spite of everything, the various activities continued under his direction as if nothing were wrong. But at what cost? I can still see him leaving his room, walking painfully down the corridor until he reached the dining room. There he would straighten himself up, smooth his moustache, and only then enter, completely transformed. He was again the master, the superb old lion. A good-natured smile would light up his face, this familiar smile that always had the effect of reassuring us and reviving our hope once again. So it was until his last days. He seemed to time the moment of his arrival at our meals carefully in order to tire himself as little as possible and to fulfill his role most effectively. Thanks to the set progression of the toasts of the idiots, he could follow it even from his bed. I noticed that he always appeared when the toast was given for all hopeless idiots. The ritual recitation of this toast went as follows, quote, "To the health of all hopeless idiots, objectively and subjectively, that is, to the health of all those who are candidates to die like a dog, and to the health of all those who are candidates to die honourably." During those last days, Mr. Gurdjieff himself would then solemnly add, "He who works on himself also prepares for an honourable death." When it was time for the next toast, he would leave the table with a firm, determined step which allowed no one to suspect his fatigue. "Continue, continue," he would say without looking back. Our eyes would follow his imposing silhouette disappearing down the corridor. Time stopped. The atmosphere remained charged with his presence. His words, which filled the silence, called us back to the essential. The end. And it's sort of rather sad, isn't it, that it's finished. It's what is one of them books that, you just wish would continue and keep going. But sadly, it's finished. And so we were on to the next one, which will, as I've said, will likely be Bennett's commentaries on Beelzebub. And I think I'm going to endeavour to read the whole Gurdjieff canon as laid out by David Simon, because I believe it's a very concise and appropriate canon. I don't see any issues, that shouldn't be in there, or that maybe Jean de Salzman's The Reality of Being, I would add, but we can add that at the end, right, once we've gone through the canon. So we already have, I'm not going to list all the books, but In Search of the Miraculous, and Ouspensky's The Fourth Way, Maurice Nichols' introduction to work ideas, which is very helpful, and as we learn from the canon, the first chapter of The Fourth Way is like a very general overview. And as regards memoir, we have Margaret Anderson, the De Hartmans, and now Tcheslaw Tchekhovitch. So we're making good pace, good timing. And like I say, I think The Four Ideals is the name of this channel, and as we move on, I really need to take some time to share these ideas, what the Four Ideals is, what Mr. Gurdjieff saw it as laid out in Beelzebub's Tales. But as we're going to read the two commentaries, and then although it's available on the app, so you can go listen to it anytime you like, I think it would be nice for us to read it again together. And I'm going to do less digressing and less rambling, and sort of see it as a spiritual practice that I'm just going to read it. Of course, I'll always say hello and welcome people into the stream and address any questions after, but it will be more of a like a ceremony, a spiritual practice, let's say. And because that's how I feel it should be important to do it, and perhaps maybe after, the day after, or the next time we go live, we can then discuss and read notable sections. But who knows? Who knows? Like I say, it's available right now if you want to go and start. But as I said, it's looking like J.G. Bennett's commentaries on Beelzebubs will win. Many people seem to be interested in Anna Butkovsky-Hewitt, and with Gurdjieff in St. Petersburg and Paris. And so I don't see any reason why we can't read that after, because why the hell not? I believe this exists in the canon as well. So, and just because it's not in David Simon's canon doesn't mean we can't read it either. So it's a nice sort of loose foundation. But of course, one can read whatever they like outside of the Four Ideals, but we'll be working through these books here. We've almost finished volume 1 of Maurice Nichols' commentaries, so we'll plough on into volume 2. So lots going on here at the channel. It's always nice to see everyone and to connect. Quite quiet in the chat tonight, but that's not an issue. And so, yeah, I will upload, I think, another couple of Maurice Nichols commentaries later in the week. Maybe a video about something or other if I'm inspired to do so. But we'll likely be back on Sunday evening for the next book we will work through, which is very likely to be J.G. Bennett's Talks on Beelzebub. So, my friends, enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for joining. It's lovely to connect and be with you. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you very soon. Bye now.